Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste, hello everyone. Welcome to the NPTEL course Role of Craft and Technology in Interior Architecture. Today we will discuss module 37 and we will talk about interventions, and the focus would be the product or design based interventions. So we will talk about the product design based interventions. We will see some examples and references towards the end. So in the previous module where we started talking about interventions, we identified majorly 4 kinds of interventions that we will talk about. The process based, product design based, which we are going to see today, few of them of course, technology based, and the marketing and management based. We also tried to understand what is the meaning of design intervention. So design interventions are seen as a supplement to existing research methods, one that favors and explores unsettled and imagined possibility, yet employs empiricist virtues of embodiment, empathy and documentary forms. So the interventions definitely talk about the explorations and one step further of what exists, but it definitely does not take away from the empirical knowledge, the one which has been employed generation to generation and which has transferred through oral traditions, also by making and giving it to the next generation. So there is an empathy towards the existing skills and the knowledge. The design intervention is a placeholder concept, as this report suggests and the author suggests, because of its ambiguity allows for a wider range of conceptual alternatives to be explored. And the immediate objective is not so much to arrive at closure as it is to prompt reflections about the issue in discursive contexts. So I really found this interesting, that how it is also the empathy towards the empirical virtues and skills plus the explorations, and where the target and the closure is not the only aim, but to also understand the importance of different contexts and how that intervention actually works for that particular context. So we are going to see some examples. The first one is the Kala Raksha Vidyalaya. It's in Kutch, Gujarat, and the director is Judy Frater, and she has dedicated her entire life to this cluster, especially the women who work on embroidery here. And she settled in India. She's not an Indian, but she dedicatedly works with this cluster of women artisans, and then she has really nurtured their skills and introduced a lot of interventions, and the Kala Raksha Vidyalaya is now something else. It's an example, it's an exemplary illustration of interventions and how the artisans can actually be empowered. So here we see some of their traditional designs and how they work, what are the different designs that they work on, and with the help of interventions they have come up with a range of products which is local as well as global. It's all done by the artisans themselves, and lot of the exhibitions, displays and fashion shows happen where their works have been displayed. Also there is a product range which can be bought online. There is a digital portfolio where different users and interested individuals can see their product ranges along with the detail of the artisan who actually did that. So it's a platform where we see the primary importance and focus given to the artisan and their skills, and how they have really continued their craft, revived it, and attained the market goal. They are empowered, they are employed, they have livelihood, and the designs are accepted according to the current market trends. So, the problem of many of the artisans at the Vidyalaya, as pointed out by Judy Frater herself, is finding a market for their finished products. The traditional solution is what Frater calls design intervention, when a professional designer from outside the community steps in to provide new concepts for new markets. Now, this is what usually happens. Designer meets artisans, and a designer comes from outside the community, comes with their new ideas and concepts, and then try to tell the community that they need to do this work in this particular manner and for such and such output or the target which is required to be achieved. But in cases like that, the approach can be detrimental, diluting the craft and reducing the artisans to just being laborers. It would be a waste of effort and creativity, labor without the joy of creativity. So, in such an approach, the artisan takes a back seat and their creativity is not given importance, they are not given creative freedom. So, that is the problem with this approach. Kala Raksha Vidyalaya, created by Frater in 2005, provides the foundation upon which artists can design their own products. So, artisans, they design their own products, they are the main stakeholders and they are given entire freedom along with inputs from the visiting designers, students, professionals. But they have this creative freedom and they design on their own. They have this 1-year program which consists of 6 classes teaching everything from color sourcing to market orientation to concept development and communication. So, they are given exposure to everything and eventually they design on their own. The program culminates in the creation of a final portfolio which encompasses not just new designs but also brand identity and marketing. So, these artisans are also taken outside the community to some cities to do the market survey, to get exposure, to ask questions, to see, to observe, to learn, to understand. They come back and they try to put that observation in their design and come up with different kinds of product ranges. So, that is another interesting way of empowering them. These portfolios are then digitized and placed online in order to expose student talent to people outside the community, which is like phenomenal. So, all their work is digitized in their name with due importance to their creativity. It is put online in a digital mode. So, we see here this digital portfolio and one artisan who is putting her work with the assistants. Some of them are also given basic training for ICT. So, all these are like empowerment to the women. First of all, the exposure to the market and giving them different inputs, then putting the portfolio digitally, also bringing in a lot of people for discussions and brainstorming and inputs. So, it is a very interesting platform and model and it is a successful intervention. Different pictures, products and the women with the founder Judy Frater. And then there are some melas and some ramp walks where these artisans are taken, they are empowered, their work is celebrated and recognized. So, all these really in true sense empower these women, and when they go out to such exhibitions and melas and shows and they introduce themselves as young designers, that is when everybody knows that yes, that is empowerment. And they have the courage to face the world, show their designs and work upon them, improvise, continue their designs, revive them, recontextualize them, reinvent them, rediscover them, represent them. So, that is how it is an interesting model. Since the new market is no longer local, nor are crafts necessarily prepared only for the utilitarian purposes, the functional basis that drove innovation is altered. In addition, since the market has expanded, innovations must be faster and less subtle. Instead of varying the pattern within an object, the object itself must be changed. A different cautiousness is essential for craft to succeed in the market. So, whenever we talk about interventions, such kinds of observations come into picture. What are the attributes of interventions today, and what kind of scale is required? It's not just changing few patterns and few motifs, but it's thinking about all new product range, different kinds of objects and products themselves. How could they not be just utilitarian but also serve other purposes? So when the intervention comes into picture, and particularly the product and design aspect is talked about and looked at, it is a huge gamut of explorations which give that kind of intervention, which really put that kind of result into picture, that the intervention is accepted, successful, there is demand for the product, and there is a lot of employment generated. So all those concerns are paramount and they have to be catered to. The minimization of labor in traditional art has allowed entry of new elements. With exposure to new markets through settling and embroidering commercially, Rabari women have gained access to a vast array of new materials, colors and patterns. So when an intervention is talked about and the product is the outcome and the end consideration, it's not just about changing a little pattern or just thinking about a new design, but it's also introducing new materials, the color schemes. So there are a lot of layers to intervention, and the more they are explored in a very creative and functional way, the better the results. Remarkably, Rabaris choose new elements according to their own still vital sense of aesthetics, essentially following the design brief. So they have a sort of a design brief, but largely the women here who are working on these embroideries, they choose elements according to their own vital sense of aesthetics, which is again putting the artisan or the artist at the center of all the activities that happen and giving them that freedom. The labor savers expressly enable more rapid execution. As a result, artisans have become eager for ever rapid changes in style. Thus, fashion has emerged as a concept. So they do understand, what is the fashion, what is in vogue, what is the market demand, and they are ever ready for these rapid changes. They do understand what is required for the market, and when they are given that liberty and kept at the center, after gaining all that exposure and understanding, their designs do reflect what is needed for contemporary times. But still they are the creators, it is still customized and not getting mass produced, and they have this sense of again recontextualizing and reviving. What if artisans learn to think like designers? If one recognizes the creative capability of artisans in terms of cost efficiency and feasibility, it is more practical to think of training traditional artisans in design principles than the other way around, which usually happens, than to train designers in craft traditions. Further, in terms of the survival of craft traditions, it is more sustainable, and that is what Kala Riksha Vidyalaya follows. So, they give the training of design principles to the artisans. And while we are talking about this successful intervention and this example, it is also important to understand how this empathy towards the artisans, their empirical skills, and the employment of ethnographic techniques could be a successful model to work upon, because slowly the field of design is, there is a lot of importance now given to the ethnographic field techniques and how to really do research and work with these communities and put the entire focus on them and learn through them. So, the ethnographic field techniques of in situ observation and interview have been widely adopted and employed in varied newer professional design fields that value the inspirational potential of qualitative studies and potential for collaboration. So, when we talk about interventions, it is not just a measurable quantitative output or a target, but it is also the qualitative studies, the ethnographic field studies, to get to know the artisan community better, to build a rapport with them, to learn from them, to give our inputs, to let them hear us, with all comfort. So, that kind of a rapport, it needs different kinds of tools, and now the design field is gaining, more and more attention, and it's employing those kinds of field techniques. So, such as interaction design, commercial innovation, design thinking, and public sector innovation. All these different fields are coming up within the design umbrella, and they all give lot of importance to the ethnographic field techniques. More academic circles of design research have ethnography gained relatively much exposure and application. Now, talking a little bit more about the product intervention and the different perspectives and opinions different people and different reports have pointed out regarding the product, end product, when we talk about craft. Although craft has been a cultural and ritualistic activity, but the products that were made were viable enough for sales and production, as can be seen in the Jajmani system. That was of great significance. The manufacturing of products was done by the hereditary artisanal clusters, the castes, who were either under patronage of royals or carried out production on commission basis. So, there is a mention of this Jajmani system and how the production and sales of the craft products were carried on. Such a reciprocal arrangement between artisanal castes and the village community for supply of services and utilitarian products was known as the Jajmani system. When the craft was largely utilitarian and there was a large interaction between the artisanal castes and the guilds and with the other community of the village, and how their services were taken, how the services were taken care of, how their needs were taken care of, and how the products reached the community through these artisans. So, that was the Jajmani system. Thus, production of such crafts enabled the artisan to earn a livelihood that was regular and sustained. So, it does not happen anymore, and livelihood is the biggest concern, and hence all these discussions on revival and interventions are happening. The ones who provided the services and goods were called Purjans. This system created a means of sustenance at the time of scarcity, where the products were absorbed locally, and thus provided with security in economic terms. The production activity of these artisans was not aimed at creating products on competitive lines, but to maintain a community life of a region or village in a holistic way. So, because the system has changed, the crafts are not just utilitarian, the market is not just local, and there is a lot of competition. Therefore, all these changes have happened, and there is a need of intervention, and it is important to have this cognizance, to understand this change, to understand the continuity, and to work on the traditional designs with some interventions and inputs, and to give them some contemporary expressions, contemporary functions, and generate livelihood for these artisans, which is otherwise in a very dismal state. So this system that we were talking about, it created ecology within a community, utilitarian products and community interacting with the artisans and the entire supply and demand working in that particular system. But now that's not happening anymore, and therefore we are discussing a lot of interventions which are needed for the sustenance of the community. But the crucial point here is that how is that sustenance still culturally rooted, and how does it really involve the craft person and their tacit skills, so that the entire attention is not on the end product, which is very contemporary and different from what they used to do, but it has to be a synthesis of what they were doing and how certain new inputs come into picture, which are also through their observation and understanding, and then finally there is an end product which really serves all the purposes. Some more perspectives and opinions regarding the product, products in the craft process, and how to really think about product interventions. By reviewing a community's uniquely nostalgic definitions of craft, designers might uncover which technological traditions, values and goals users desire to take from past designs into the future. This is the synthesis or the symphony that I was mentioning while we were discussing the last slide, and it's very important how the past designs are taken into the future. What is the approach? By understanding craft as a local process across culturally variable logic, so we were talking about the culturally viable sustenance, and a product that hails active consumers. This is very important. This essay ultimately argues that designers and writers alike might come to create more user-centered and emancipatory compositions. So this is an excerpt from an essay, and this is what they are talking about when we think of product intervention or a design intervention, and how it has to be more user-centered, and it hails active consumers. So all these studies need to be done, they have to be understood, and only then the interventions would be successful. Whether it's knitting, cross stitch, woodwork, origami, more and more digital composers are turning to craft, for handicraft seems to hold a godly power to re-embody the digital, produce calculable products, and connect designers to their technological roots in ways digital modes of composition do not. So there is also a lot of mention of digital crafts and how more and more digital tools come into picture, and there is a sort of digital exploration of a particular handcraft skill. So all those explorations are also happening, and during one of the modules we discussed, for the case of stone, that how the CNC, the CAD and CAM has completely taken over the stone craft, and how there is a debate, how much intervention should be there, and we try to sort of conclude that there has to be a balance where the hand skills are also celebrated, and then there is a lot of assistance and help from the power tools and the technical interventions. According to Gray, Cooley and others, product development can include adding product features, refining of a product which is already existing, expanding the product line, developing a new generation of products, or developing new products for the same market. Any one of these areas can be applied to the art and craft market. And when we talk about the product development and interventions related to product and design, then all these value additions and different aspects that the authors are talking about are quite possible and viable. Arts and craft are perfectly suited to impact sustainable development through design. So, we talk about design and we talk about sustainable development and art and craft. So, all these linkages, they need to be established, and design can really sustain art and craft, and there can be very interesting interventions which are suited for a particular community, which are relevant to their needs, and that needs a lot of background research, ethnographic field techniques, rapport building with the community, working with them, going to them rather than bringing out of their context, and sharing and brainstorming and working together. There are few more interesting things. So, brokering is another approach that has been adopted in the countries, especially Europe. So, in the area of product development, the artist can fulfill a vital role as a broker. The community, market, business, government and trainers are among the different parties that must be brought together to form a partnership, then can develop the necessary products. So, it is talking about establishing necessary partnerships and then taking care of product development, trying to understand these linkages and value chain. Design interventions have a very important role in every step of the process and creation of the craft. And these interventions should focus on the identity of a craft, which we always keep talking about. It should not take away from the identity of the craft, its social and cultural relevance, and the processes and materials involved to incorporate the interventions in the right situations with efficient expected outcomes and reasoning. So, ideally this is what design interventions mean and how they have to be employed and introduced, and what all important aspects and considerations they must have. If we have to really empower these artisans and craft persons, and if we have to really establish this sector as something which is very important for generating employment, as well as the one that we see as a cultural resource and as an identity to our country. Design interventions, talking about that further, one would come across amazing indigenous innovations in India that can be developed into marketable products and thereby help in creating business success. These could provide vital directions for a country like India to transform into an innovation driven economy, which is already happening, and we have had the decade of innovation. We have a lot of design hubs coming into picture. We have innovation as the buzzword, and we are already an innovation driven economy. So, all that is happening, and these interventions just need to be understood from the perspective that the community benefits out of it. Now, since we were talking about what are the design interventions that one seeks, what are different perspectives on it, and what are different attributes which are ideally required out of such interventions, let us also see what are the problems and why the interventions are needed, and what are the bottlenecks when we talk about the art craft forms, their marketing, their products. So, particularly talking about Uttarakhand, we see the reasons for decrease in sales, and we see here one of the major highlights, lack of innovative products. There are other factors, but we are highlighting particularly here the lack of innovative products and lack of technological advancements. So, we began with the identification of 4 kinds of interventions, where we talked about the product or design interventions, and we also talked about the technology interventions. So, there are already statistics which tell and which have highlighted this gap, and which can be addressed through the interventions, so that this problem could be solved. The major operational problems faced by MSMEs in Uttarakhand. Again here, besides other things like skilled, unskilled the unskilled and the untrained craft persons or workers, and then limited awareness and lack of knowledge of policies. We see this crucial point over here, difficulties in marketing and selling products. So, we also identified one area of intervention as the market or management intervention, and we see here. So, sometimes the product themselves are not in demand because they need lot of revival, reinterpretation, redesigning, recontextualization. At times, if the product range is there, then there are problems with the marketing. The products are not reaching the market. Again, going by the SWOT analysis, we see here low productivity. Then we also see product substitutes due to fast changing technology. So, this they have highlighted as a threat. So, what kind of product interventions are done that they are not reduced to just some low quality substitutes which are just produced in a quick fast way to suffice for the mass production demand in a market, because eventually if the quality is not good and the product is just a substitute of what could be an original interesting art and craft piece, then the sales would go down. Then trying to understand the design intervene craft entrepreneur model. Here also if we see the entire process here which is highlighted, we see here the important point, exploring product potential in the market. So, until and unless that potential is understood and established, the intervention wouldn't work. So, all these are steps and it is a step by step process. Again here we see market analysis, we see village craft entrepreneur making process. So, this entire process is important. To understand the product potential is important, to understand what are the gaps, what are the problems, why it is not reaching the market, what are the design flaws, what are the new trends and demands. Until and unless that is explored, the product or the design interventions won't work. So, it is an important process and it really need to be employed and taken care of before really coming up with interventions. Now, we have always talked about the global presence craft has and the importance that it it gets, especially in the field of visual arts. So, craft has a global presence and is endowed with an extraordinary locus in the field of visual arts, which is extending to space making. And since we have been talking about building crafts and the extension of these craft forms into the milieu of space making, so which is extending to space making and interior architecture as well as other design practices and disciplines. There are also interventions which are coming up in line with this kind of interdisciplinary scenario. In contemporary tech design contexts, revolutionary hybrid models combining craft, interior architecture, design education, design practice, they are evolving. These hybrid models are demonstrating a paradigm shift from the conventional singular approach to a pluralistic integrated approach that has led to the emergence of a new vocabulary with terms like design, space making crafts, D-crafts, D-art, interior architecture, building crafts, etc. So, since we are talking about interventions, it is also important to consider that there is a lot of transdisciplinarity involved today and there are a lot of hybrid models which are coming up, and exploring these hybrid models and coming up with interventions is a welcome step and it would lead to new possibilities. New explorations combining traditional craft processes in commercial space making applications are gaining attention. Craft, design and interior architecture have been included in the list of UNESCO's creative and cultural industries, we already talked about it, are generating employment and contributing to the world economy and gross domestic product of many nations. Craftsperson's knowledge and modeling skills are being linked to the cultural and creative industries, entangled with new design perspectives, and applied to prototyping, especially in the space making applications. So, these interventions are also happening, and we saw some of the modules already where we also came across the explorations done by different organizations and institutes and individuals, and where they have really explored the art and craft forms in the space making milieu. So, we are talking about the interventions, and we have seen this slide enough, but just to give us sort of a crux. Again, starting from a utilitarian object to being used as a construction material, we have seen how terracotta craft has come a long way through interventions. We also see the interventions in the way of making, the motive, the material used. So, this thickery calm which was used, the thickery work, the mirror work which was done in a particular way in the traditional forms which we have already seen in one of the modules, it is getting reinterpreted. The kinds of mirrors are different, they are light, the motifs are different, the application is different, and the concept of mirror, it's also used sometimes in buildings. So, this is by Norman Foster, and how we see the transformation of a material and the process involved through time and technology. We also see the motifs, different motifs, contemporary expressions. We see again a traditional element, how it is explored in a different material through different joineries, and culminating into different prototypes for different functions which it was not used earlier for. We were talking about the thickery calm, and we see some traditional expression to some contemporary expression, and how the application has changed from here to something like this. So, there are different changes which are happening. I am not saying not all of them are very good, but one has to strike a balance. So, this is the restaurant Vedas in Delhi, and there we see the application of thickery calm in a very contemporary different way. So, again it is a contemporary interpretation, and expressions have changed. The motifs again more graphical and digital and more simplified. So, we see a lot of changes happening in the expressions. This is for a floor inlay design. This is done by Mr. Rajiv, who is also a TA with me in this course, and how a simple motif lotus which was used earlier in a very different form, in a different expression, is currently used in many different forms, so giving more effects, more contemporary, more in demand, more acceptable motifs and designs and forms. Then taking inspiration from the traditional elements, how different explorations are done. So, this is a lamp exploration, and it was done for a country in project, and how screen printing on linen is done, and how these designs are achieved which are so effective, aesthetic, and involve the craft persons who still do things with hand. Then the craft design interventions and customer market oriented designs. Let us see few of the customer market oriented designs done by few professionals and studios, and also some organizations. So, this is again DICRC, and probably we would have discussed it earlier, but again just to put things in perspective and give a brief crux. This is the wood turning craft, a small cluster, and how small elements were made and small utilitarian objects were made out of it, but with little intervention, with little open mindedness, how something like this, a partition screen was made, and the craft person Anil Bhai, he was very open to this brainstorming and exploration and intervention, and he came up with this kind of a prototype. Also, we explained him the joinery interventions and how these traditional elements could be used in a contemporary way in different forms at different places and different scales, and he was open to that idea, and then this kind of an openness and interaction, it generated a lot of good results. So, some drawings that were generated at the ICRC, and the entire inventory of different sections that could be made earlier on their lathe, and then how we assemble them into this partition screen, which in itself is a visual repository of different sections, different elements, different colors that are followed by these craft people in that community. So they were ready to experiment with the material. They tried some explorations in bamboo. They were ready to also experiment with the color scheme and things like that. Talking about intervention, how stone, seen in very heavy ornate applications in the built forms, how it's transforming and new contemporary expressions and interventions are coming. And this is Ambaji, and some interventions on the stone turning machine and some kind of details that they make. And this is again one exploration. It was done at the ICRC by a dear friend Purna, and she created this modular partitioning system working with the industry and the craft persons. So there was a lot of involvement of craft persons. There was basic cutting, and the power tools and machines were used for, of course, for the cutting of slabs and some important purposes, but the other details, the carving, the texture, and the understanding of the scale and proportion, it was all done by the craft persons along with the designer Purna. So this again some exploration that was done. Some more exploration in stone, working on the modules and then creating the partition system along with the handwork. There is a lot of inlay work here which is done by hand. So these are again some interventions, and yeah, I also worked on this prototype during this workshop while I was working at the ICRC, and this is now installed at CEPT, and we came up with these modules made in stone which were anyway waste or leftovers from different other products, and how it was assembled with the interesting joinery, coming up with smaller details like this work, relief work or inlay, and then working with the team of craft persons. Some more interventions which are done by Alaya Design Studio, and how they work on traditional materials and craft forms with some contemporary interventions, be it the expression, be it the different product range that they make, or be it the value addition that they do. So different kind of products that they make, and they also work with the artisans and craft persons. So this is very interesting. I have this at my home, and how a seating is designed using traditional material, all worked by hands by the craft persons, and getting used in contemporary spaces and interiors, gardens for sitting, relaxing. Some more explorations here we see. So there is timber, and then we have this traditional method of making cot, and how we come up with some contemporary furniture range and products that are more acceptable, suited, or which are points of interest for the contemporary market and the people who would readily buy them, also for the aesthetics and not just functional aspect. Some coasters which are done out of newspaper, and they are functional, they are aesthetic, sustainable, recyclable. More explorations by them, and it's a simple traditional technique. It's just a wire frame and then work done by the craft person to create this piece. Lamps, very interesting lamps, and these are very interesting explorations that they do in furniture. A lot of them are the leftover wood shellings and shreddings, and they utilize them to make furniture. Something like this with the timber frame and this katran, and this beautiful furniture piece is created. Something very contemporary done out of timber, and which is a statement in itself, and this is also done with the help of craft persons. They have this team, they have their own workshop, and they work hand in hand with the craft persons. Some interesting explorations like these. Again, stools, furnitures, simple designs. So I would like to wrap up by saying this interesting quote. As we get more rootless, we crave more to discover our roots. Crafts in many ways connect us to our roots. As we become more nomadic, due to globalization, cultural products and practices will become more and more important in our lives. And that's what we are trying to understand through this course as well. So the next module will focus on the interventions, and we will talk about the technology aspect, and we'll continue our discussions on interventions through that. Let us see some references. So these are particularly some references focusing on the design intervention part, which I have put for you. More of these, we were discussing the Kala Raksha Vidyalaya, design interventions, teaching design, design interventions and execution in crafts of India. So again, very focused and relevant references here, and more of the collective combined ones. Thank you.